The day the black ships didn't show up, something felt wrong. The sky looked empty. The radios only made static noise. Government workers stared up, waiting for ships that never came. I was one of those workers. My job: count people, write their names, send them away on the black ships. But when the ships stopped coming, we didn't stop working. We kept counting, we kept writing names. Because in this empire, when something goes missing, it doesn't mean you're free. It means something worse is coming. This is my story. The story of what happens when the collectors stop collecting. But the debt keeps growing. I was sentenced not in a courtroom, but in a basement that smelled of mildew and candle wax. No, that's not right. I wasn't sentenced to anything, not yet. But looking back now, from this place where the walls breathe and the numbers won't stop counting themselves, I see that the basement was always a courtroom, and I was always guilty. My name was Clerk, Tertiary Valen Cross, Administrative Division Sigma 7 Sub, Sector Census and Tithe Compliance Hive Primus. I held that name for 32 years. I wore it like a uniform, pressed and starched, never questioning what it covered. My desk sat in the third row from the back, beneath a flickering lumoglobin tube that hummed a single note all day, every day, until my skull learned to hum along with it. I counted people, not in the way you might imagine, faces in a crowd, children in a schoolyard. No, I counted them the way you count bullets in a magazine, rations in a storehouse, rivets in a ship's hull. I counted them as units of Imperial compliance, as flesh quotas to be tallied, transported, and forgotten. The Psyker tithe. Every world pays it, every world must. The god Emperor's black hold ships arrive on schedule, their bellies vast and cold, their corridors lined with restraints and hymnal speakers. They take the witches, the cursed, the dangerous, the damned, and they take them away, to terror, they said, to service, to salvation, to the golden throne itself. I never questioned it. Why would I? Questioning the tithe would be like questioning gravity, or the need to breathe. It simply was. My duty was not to wonder where the ships went, or what became of the cargo once the airlocks sealed shut with that final, pneumatic hiss. My duty was to ensure the count was correct, and for 32 years it was. Until the 17th cycle of the year marked 847, M for 1, when the scheduled black ship did not eclipse the sun. I remember the morning. I remember it the way you remember the moment before a fall. The brief, stupid second when your body hasn't realized the ground is gone. The light in the administratum was the same as always, grey, filtered through dust and wire mesh windows that hadn't been cleaned since before my grandfather was born. The air tasted of parchment and rust. Somewhere 3 floors down, a servitor choir was chanting the morning supplication of counting, their voices flat and mechanical, like broken bells. I sat at my desk. I opened my ledger. I ran my finger down the columns. Transit expected. Day 47, Cycle 17, Fleet Designation Shadow of Penance, Cargo Allotment 3014 units, status pending. The word sat there innocent and vile. Pending. I stared at it. My quill hovered. The ink dried on the nib, and I had to wipe it clean with a rag that smelled of benzene and old sweat. I checked the schedules again. The Vox logs. The transit manifests copied in triplicate and blessed by the Ministorum liaison. Everything was correct. Everything was in order. The black ship was due, but the sky outside the window was empty. Not empty the way a sky is empty when the clouds are low. Empty the way a mouth is empty after the tongue is cut out. There was space where something should have been. A void where weight and shadow and terrible, humming purpose should have pressed down on the world like a boot on an ant. I felt it in my chest first. A tightness. A pressure that wasn't pain but wasn't breath either. My fingers moved without instruction, flipping pages, cross-referencing cargo logs and arrival vectors and astropathic confirmations that I had filed 6 weeks prior. Everything was correct. So why wasn't the ship here? I stood, my chair scraped. The sound was louder than it should have been, and 3 desks over, Clerk Secundus Halvan looked up with the expression of a man who had just heard a door slam in an empty house. Problem, cross, no, I said. My voice sounded far away. Just checking. Checking what? I didn't answer. I walked. The Vox astropathic station was on the 9th floor, behind 3 doors that required 3 separate authorization stamps. I had all 3. I always kept them updated. I was diligent. The chamber smelled like incense and something else, something I didn't have a name for. Burnt hair maybe, or ozone, or the way the air smells right before a storm, when the sky is the color of a bruise and you know deep in your animal brain that lightning is coming. The astropath was there. He always was, a hunched figure in robes so old they might have been stitched from shadows. His eyes were gone, replaced, long ago, by smooth scar tissue and the faint glow of something that wasn't light but wasn't darkness either. His name was Choir Master Oral, though no one called him that. We called him Sir, or Eminence, or nothing at all. I approached. My boots made no sound. The floor was soft here, layered in carpets that swallowed noise the way water swallows stones. He didn't turn. The transit schedule, I said. Shadow of Penance. Expected arrival day 47. Status. His head tilted, just slightly, like a bird deciding whether the thing in front of it was food or threat. Delayed, he said. The word came out flat, no inflection, no apology. Delayed, I repeated. For how long? Unknown. Can you? I stopped. My throat was dry. Can you reach them? Send another query. Confirm status. He turned then, slowly. The glow where his eyes should have been brightened, just a fraction, and I felt something cold slide down my spine. We have sent queries, he said. His voice was a whisper, but it filled the room. We have sung the beacons. We have lit the candles of calling, burned the names in sacred script, and opened the channels wide enough to bleed. He leaned closer. I could smell him now. Smoke and copper and something rotten beneath. The void, he said, does not answer. I left. I don't remember walking back to my desk. I don't remember sitting down, or opening the ledger again, or picking up the quill. But I must have, because when I looked down, not in the proper column, not in the space designated for remarks or status updates, in the margin, small, shaking, overdue, 17th cycle, I stared at it. The ink was still wet. It glistened like blood. I should have crossed it out, should have filed an amended report, requested clarification, escalated the concern through proper channels. That was procedure, that was order. But I didn't, because somewhere deep in the part of me that still remembered how to be afraid, I knew that writing those words had changed something. Not in the world, not yet. In me. I sealed the ledger. I pressed the purity wax into the cover, stamped it with my signet, and placed it in the outgoing tray where it would be collected, copied, filed, and forgotten. But my hand was shaking, and when I looked at the wax seal, still soft and warm, I saw that my fingerprint had smudged the edge. It looked like a stain. That night I went home. My quarters were small, regulation, and cold. A single bed, a single window, a single chair facing a single wall. I sat in the chair and stared at the wall and tried not to think, but that the silence was there. Not the silence of an empty room, the silence of something waiting. I closed my eyes, I tried to sleep, but all I could hear was the scratching, soft, rhythmic, like a quill on parchment, like someone somewhere was counting, and I knew, with the certainty of a man who has just heard his own name read from a list, that the black ships were not late. They were not delayed. They were not coming. And the tithe, the debt, the quota, the weight, was still due. The orders came down 3 days later, not from the Vox Astropathic Choir, not from the planetary governor's office, or the Arbeits Precinct, or even the local Ministorum Cathedral with its bronze bells and incense-choked halls. They came from above. And when I say above, I don't mean physically, I mean hierarchically, bureaucratically. They came from the place where orders are born, formless, inevitable, and utterly unconcerned with the lives they will consume. The message was simple: continue census operations, continue intake protocols, continue faith. 3 sentences, 37 words total including the purity benediction at the end. No explanation, no acknowledgement of the delay, no mention of the void's silence, or the empty sky, or the fact that 314 human beings were currently locked in the holding pens beneath the administratum annex, waiting for a ship that would not come. Just continue. I read it 4 times. Then I folded it, stamped it, filed it, and returned to my desk. Because that's what you do, you continue. The holding pens were not originally designed to hold people. They were storage vaults, built during the hive's expansion in the early centuries of the Imperium's reclamation efforts. Massive stone chambers carved into the bedrock, 20 meters below street level, with walls so thick you couldn't hear the city above. They were meant for grain, ammunition, medical supplies, things that could be stacked, sealed, and forgotten until needed. Now they held witches. The first expansion order came on day 51. By then, the pens were at capacity, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder in the gloom, their breath steaming in the cold, their restraints clinking like wind chimes made of bone. The air down there was thick, mildew, sweat, the sour, sweet stink of fear, piss, and unwashed skin. The lamps buzzed constantly, old incandescent bulbs that flickered and hummed and cast shadows that moved when they shouldn't. The order was cleared: expand capacity by 30%. I did the math. 30% of 314 was 94.2. You can't have 0.2 of a person, so I rounded up. 95. 95 more bodies to fit into a space already groaning under the weight of the first 300. I filed a resource request. Cots, blankets, additional lighting, water rations, sedative allotments for the more volatile specimens. The response came back the same day: approved. Reallocate as needed. Relocate. That word did a lot of work. It meant take from somewhere else, strip another department, gut another budget, make it fit, because the alternative, acknowledging that the system was failing, was unthinkable. So I reallocated. I pulled 12 cots from the medical ward. I requisitioned 18 scratchy wool blankets from the veterans hospice. I diverted a month's worth of water rations from the lower hive worker districts and stamped the diversion form with the administratum's official seal, which made it legal, which made it right. The work continued. Every day, more arrived. They came in chains. They came in the backs of cargo trucks with canvas sides and arbits escorts who wouldn't meet your eyes. They came with their heads shaved, their wrists raw, their eyes wide and glassy like animals who knew, on some level deeper than thought, that the slaughterhouse was close. Some cried, some prayed, some laughed. High, broken sounds that echoed in the stone halls and made the guards grip their shock mauls tighter. I processed them all. Name, age, hive sector of origin, nature of psychic manifestation, threat level, date of intake. I wrote it down, I stamped it, I filed it, and then I sent them down into the dark. By day 60 the pens held 409. By day 70 532. By day 80, I stopped counting individuals and started counting mass, square meters of occupancy, caloric intake per body per day, projected mortality rates based on temperature, humidity, and infectious disease vectors. It was easier that way, less human. The scribes around me were changing too. Halvan stopped eating lunch at his desk. He'd sit there, staring at his ledger, his quill hovering over the same line for an hour at a time. Once, I saw him mouth something, silent, repetitive, like a prayer or a mantra. When I asked him what he was doing, he looked at me with hollow eyes and said, "Counting blessings." He didn't smile. Scribe Manarus Yell started carrying a rosary, not the standard issue ministorum beads, but something older, cruder, carved from wood that looked almost like bone. She'd run the beads through her fingers while she worked, whispering under her breath, and the clicking sound would fill the office like the ticking of a clock that had forgotten how to stop. Even the servitors seemed off. They still performed their tasks, carrying messages, filing parchments, sweeping the floors with their mechanical precision. But sometimes they'd pause, just for a second. Their heads would tilt, their ocular lenses would refocus, and you'd swear, just for that instant, that something behind those dead eyes was listening. And then they'd move again, and the moment would pass, and you'd tell yourself it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Nothing doesn't make your skin crawl. Nothing doesn't wake you up at 3 in the morning with the taste of copper in your mouth, and the certainty that someone, somewhere, is calling your name. On day 83, I went down to the pens. I didn't have to. My job was administration, not supervision. The custodians handled the day-to-day management, feeding, sedation, disposal of the dead. But I needed to see it, needed to confirm that the numbers in my ledger matched the reality beneath the stone. The descent was long. 3 flights of iron stairs, each one narrower and steeper than the last, until the walls pressed close and the air turned cold and damp. The lamps here were older, guttering candles in iron sconces, their flames small and weak, barely enough to see by. I reached the first pen. The door was steel 3 inches thick, with a viewing slot at eye level. I slid it open. The smell hit me first. Thick, organic, the kind of smell that coats the back of your throat and stays there. Then the sound, breathing hundreds of breaths, shallow and arrhythmic, overlapping like waves. And beneath that a low, constant murmur. Not words, not quite, but the shape of words, like a language spoken by something that no longer remembered how to be human. I looked inside. Bodies, pressed together, some sitting, some lying down, some standing because there was no room to do anything else. Their skin was pale, not sick pale, but drained pale, like something had been pulled out of them and not replaced. Their eyes reflected the candlelight in strange ways, colors that shouldn't exist in human irises. Violet, copper, a kind of sick greenish gold. One of them looked at me, a girl maybe 16. Her hair was patchy, torn out in clumps. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. but I felt them, a pressure behind my eyes, a weight in my chest, the sudden, irrational certainty that if I didn't look away right now, something inside me would tear. I closed the slot. My hand was shaking. A custodian approached, Sergeant Varak, a veteran with a face like cracked leather and a voice that sounded like gravel in a barrel. "You shouldn't be down here, Cross. I needed to see," I said. My voice was thin. "And now you have." He gestured toward the stairs. "Goo," I went, but as I climbed I heard it again, that murmur, that low formless sound, and I realized with a sick lurch in my stomach that it wasn't coming from the pens. It was coming from me. My lips were moving, counting 532, 533, 534. I stopped, but the numbers didn't. On day 91, the astropathic choir attempted a beacon hymn. I wasn't there, I wasn't supposed to be, but I heard it anyway. We all did. It started at dawn, 0600 hours, Administratum Standard Time. I was at my desk, halfway through my third recap of the morning, when the sound began. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure. A sensation that started at the base of my skull and spread forward, pressing against the inside of my forehead like fingers trying to push through from the other side. The lumoglobin tube above my head flickered. Then it went out. All of them did. Every light in the office, every glowing panel, every data slate screen. For 3 seconds we sat in perfect darkness, and in that darkness I heard singing, not voices. Not human voices anyway. It was too high, too layered, like glass shattering in reverse, each shard finding its way back into the hole but never quite fitting. The melody, if you could call it that, rose and fell in ways that made my teeth ache. Then the lights came back. The singing stopped, but the smell remained. Ozone, sharp and chemical, and beneath it something else. Burnt hair, scorched meat, the acrid stink of a fire that had been put out too late. Halvan was the first to speak. What the fuck was that? No one answered. Someone, a junior scribe whose name I didn't know, stood up, swayed, and vomited into his waste-to-paper bin. The sound was wet and loud, and no one said anything about it. No one moved to help. We just sat there. The Vox caster on the far wall crackled to life. All personnel, stand by for choir master announcement. Static. Then, astropathic communion attempted. Result inconclusive. No casualties. Repeat, no casualties. Resume standard operations. Click. The message ended. I looked around the room. Every face was pale. Every eye was wide. No casualties. The words sat in my mind like stones. If there were no casualties, why did the air still taste like something had burned? I filed an incident report. Standard protocol. 1 page, trace stamp, cross-referenced with the Vox, log timestamp, and submitted to the departmental overseer for review. In the section marked observations, I wrote, luminosity failure concurrent with psychic activity, sensory disturbance reported by multiple personnel. Recommend technical inspection and increased sedative allotments for sensitive individuals. I didn't write what I really thought. I didn't write that the singing had sounded like screaming, or that when the lights went out, I had felt something move in the darkness. Not a physical thing, but a presence, like the moment before a hand touches your shoulder and you haven't yet turned around. I sealed the report and sent it up. It came back 3 hours later. Stamped, filed, approved, and in the margins, written in red ink by a hand that was not mine, liturgical interference noted, assign cause environmental, no further action required, environmental. I stared at that word for a long time. Then I went back to counting. The dreams started that night. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment I was sitting at my desk, the next I was elsewhere. The corridor was familiar. Too familiar. The same grey walls, the same flickering lights, the same damp smell of stone and old machinery. It was the administratum, my administratum, but it was wrong. The hallway stretched, not slowly, not gradually, it just was longer. Every time I took a step, the end receded, the walls pulling away like elastic, like the building itself was breathing. I kept walking. Doors lined the corridor, hundreds of them, all identical, all closed, except one. It stood open, just a crack, and from the gap came a soft yellow light, warm, almost inviting, the kind of light you see through a window on a winter evening, when you're outside in the cold and you know just beyond the glass there's warmth and food and safety. I reached for the handle. My hand passed through it, not around it, through it, like the handle was smoke, or I pulled back. My hand looked solid, felt solid, but when I tried again, the same thing happened. My fingers sank into the metal like it wasn't there, like reality had decided, just for that moment, that I was the ghost. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate. The kind of footsteps that know exactly where they're going. I turned. The corridor was empty, but the footsteps continued. Closer, closer. I woke up. My quarters were dark. The single window showed a sliver of grey sky. Pre-dawn, maybe an hour before shift start. My blanket was soaked with sweat, my pulse hammering in my throat. I sat up, and I realized I was still hearing it. The footsteps, soft, rhythmic, coming from the wall beside my bed. I pressed my ear against the stone. Nothing. But the moment I pulled away, they started again. I didn't sleep after that. By day 100, the pens held 719. The custodians requested additional sedatives. The pharmacia sent a terse response. Current allotment at maximum sustainable output. Recommend reduced dosage per unit. Reduced dosage. That meant more screaming, more incidents. The word incident covered a lot of ground. It covered the girl in pen 3 who bit through her own tongue and didn't stop laughing even as she choked on the blood. It covered the boy in pen 7 who clawed his way through the wall. Not the door, the wall, digging with his fingernails until they peeled away and the stone beneath was slick with red. It covered the man in pen 12 who simply stopped. No injury, no illness, just stood there, eyes open, breathing slow and steady, while his heart forgot to beat. I recorded them all. Name, age, cause of cessation, date of disposal. The bodies were burned in the lower incinerators, the same ones used for medical waste and contaminated material. The ash was processed, blessed, and scattered in the underhive waste reclamation zones. Efficient, hygienic, holy. I signed the disposal manifests and tried not to think about the fact that I could now estimate the caloric value of human ash. Approximately 1.3 kilograms per body. The choir tried again on day 104. This time I was ready. I had filed a request to observe the ritual, standard academic curiosity, I claimed. The overseer approved it without comment, so I climbed the stairs to the 9th floor, passed through the 3 doors, and stood at the back of the astropathic chamber while the ritual began. The choir was small. 7 psykers, each one shaved, bound, and robed in white. Their eyes were gone, replaced, like orals, with smooth scar tissue. They sat in a circle, their heads bowed, their lips moving in silent synchronization. Oral stood at the center. He raised his hands. The singing began. It was beautiful. I hadn't expected that. It was high and clear, each voice layered perfectly over the others, building into a harmony that seemed to fill not just the room, but the air, the space between molecules, the gaps in thought. It felt like something vast and ancient was listening. Then the temperature dropped. Not gradually, all at once. My breath misted. The candles around the room flickered, their flames bending inward, pulled towards some invisible center. The singing grew louder. One of the choir members began to shake. His hands clenched, his jaw locked. His lips kept moving, but the sound coming out was no longer a hymn. It was a scream. The others faltered. Oral's hands dropped. Eld, he shouted. But it was too late. The psyker in the circle convulsed once, twice, and then his head snapped back with a sound like wet wood breaking. His mouth opened. Not wide, not theatrically, just opened. And something came out. Not sound, not light, just wrongness. A distortion in the air, a ripple like heat haze spreading outward in a silent wave. It hit me like a fist. My vision doubled, tripled. The room folded in on itself, walls overlapping, floors stacking, until I was standing in a dozen places at once, seeing through a dozen pairs of eyes that weren't mine. I tasted copper. I smelled burning hair. I heard counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Not my voice, not anyone's voice, just numbers spoken by the air itself, cold and endless and utterly devoid of meaning. Then it stopped. The psyker slumped forward, dead. The others were silent. Oral turned slowly, his eyeless face pointing directly at me. You saw, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. Then you know, he said. The void is not empty, Clerk Cross. It is full. So very, very full. He turned away. And it is hungry. I left. I walked back to my desk on numb legs. I opened my ledger, and I saw that the numbers were moving, not changing, not shifting, moving, crawling across the page like insects, rearranging themselves, forming patterns that my mind couldn't hold. Too complex, too fast, too wrong. I blinked. They stopped, but I could still feel them, waiting, watching, counting. The arbitrators arrived on day 112. I heard them before I saw them, the synchronized stomp of mag-locked boots on stone, the creak of carapace armor, the low hum of shock mauls charging in their holsters. They moved like a machine, 15 men and women in black and red, their faces hidden behind helmets with narrow eye slits that reflected nothing. They carried warrants, not digital, not vox transmitted, physical parchment, rolled and sealed with red wax stamped with the Arbit's eagle, old-fashioned, deliberate, the kind of warrant that couldn't be deleted or dismissed with a keystroke, the kind that meant someone was already guilty. Judge Arbiter Corvain led them, a tall woman with iron grey hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and a jaw like a steel trap. She walked into the administratum offices without knocking, without asking, and placed a stack of warrants on my desk with the finality of a headsman setting down his axe. "Clerk, tertiary cross," she said. Her voice was flat, stripped of anything that might be mistaken for warmth. "You will assist in cross-referencing these accusations with your census records." I looked at the stack. There had to be 200 sheets. "Accusations," I said. "Denunciations," she corrected. "Citizens exercising their sacred duty to report heresy, witchcraft, and psychic corruption within the Imperial fold." She said it like she was reading from a script. Maybe she was. I picked up the first warrant. Name Morella Vosk, occupation textile worker, sector Hive Median, block 17J. Accusation manifested unnatural foresight. Witnessed predicting shift change 3 minutes prior to alarm. Reported by Supervisor Halvok Run. I read it again. 3 minutes. She'd guessed, or known, when the work alarm would sound, 3 minutes early. That was the crime. I looked up at Corvin. This is a shift prediction. She could have just been watching the clock. Corvin's expression didn't change. "Are you questioning the validity of a citizen's denunciation, clerk?" "No." I then cross-referenced the name. "Confirm residency. Issue intake order." She moved to the next desk. I sat there, the parchment trembling in my hands. 3 minutes. I checked the census. Morella Vosk, age 34. Married, 2 children, no prior infractions, no genetic flags, nothing. I stamped the intake order. Her name went on the list. The next warrant was worse. Name Tobin Harrow, occupation, Underhive reclamation laborer, sector sub, level epsilon. Accusation manifested empathic influence over vermin. Witnessed commanding rats to disperse without physical coercion. Reported by cohabitant Mira Seln. Rats, he'd shooed away rats. I processed it. Then the next and the next. A child who laughed too loudly during a ministorum sermon. An old man whose dreams were too vivid and disturbed his neighbors through thin walls. A woman who looked at someone and made them feel cold inside. Each one was written with the same careful, terrified precision. Each one bore the signature of the accuser, the witness, the block warden. Each one was legal. By the end of the day, I had processed 93 names. 93 human beings who would be dragged from their homes, chained, shaved, and thrown into the pens beneath my feet to wait for a ship that was never coming. And I had signed every single one. That night, I tried to justify it. I sat in my quarters with a glass of watered down Amasek and told myself the lies we all tell when the work is too heavy to carry. It's not my decision. I'm just processing the paperwork. The Arbites made the arrests, I didn't. If they're innocent, the system will sort it out. But the lies tasted like ash, because I knew that there was no sorting, no appeal, no second chance. The moment a name went on the list, that person ceased to exist as anything other than a number in my ledger, a unit of tithe, a piece of cargo waiting to be loaded into a hold that would never open for them. I drank the Amasek. It didn't help. I closed my eyes, and I heard the counting again, soft, persistent, coming from somewhere I couldn't name. 93, 94, 95. I opened my eyes. The counting stopped, but my lips were still moving. On day 115, a woman came to my desk. She wasn't supposed to be there. Civilians didn't enter the administratum floors without clearance, without appointment, without reason. But somehow she'd made it past the servitors, past the guards, past the 3 locked doors and the duty roster and the purity scanners. She just appeared. She was small, thin. Her clothes were patched and faded, the kind of grey-brown that came from wearing the same outfit every day until the original color was forgotten. Her hands shook. "Please," she said. I looked up from my ledger. "Mom, you're not supposed to." "Please." Her voice cracked. "My daughter. Elara, she's 8. They took her this morning." My stomach turned to ice. "Mom, I can't. She didn't do anything." The words came faster now, tumbling over each other. "She's just a child. She had a dream, a bad dream. She told her teacher about it and the teacher, she reported her for a dream." I knew the name. I'd processed it. Elara Ven, age 8. Accusation prophetic dreaming. Witness describing classroom fire 1 week prior to minor electrical malfunction. Reported by pedagogue instructor Senna Harik. There had been a fire, small, contained. A faulty wire in the wall had sparked, scorched a desk, and been extinguished within minutes. But the girl had dreamed it, a week early. "I'm sorry," I said, and I was. The words felt like gravel in my throat. "Once the intake order is filed, I can't reverse it. It's not my jurisdiction. You'd need to appeal to the arbits, and even then." "She's 8. The woman's voice broke. Tears streamed down her face. "Please. I'll do anything. I'll take her place. Just please." I looked at her. I looked at the ledger. I looked at the name. Elara Venn. Unit number 8023. Scheduled for transport. Status pending. My hand moved. I don't remember deciding to do it. I don't remember thinking it through, weighing the consequences, calculating the risk. I just moved. I took a blank form. I filled in a cancellation notice. I forged the arbiter's signature. I'd seen it enough times, copied it enough times, that my hand knew the shape of it. I stamped it. I filed it. I looked at the woman. "She'll be released within 3 hours. I lied. "Wait at the east gate. Don't come back here." The woman stared at me. Then she grabbed my hand, both hands, and kissed my knuckles, her tears hot and wet against my skin. "Bless you," she whispered. "The Emperor protects." "Bless you." She left. I sat there, staring at the forged document, the ink still drying. I had just committed treason, not grand treason, not the kind that topples governments or starts wars. Small treason, bureaucratic treason, the kind that gets you disappeared in the middle of the night, your name struck from every record, your existence reduced to a footnote in someone else's ledger. But I felt nothing. No relief, no pride, no sense of having done the right thing. Just an emptiness. That night I lay in bed and waited for the arbits to come. They didn't, but I heard something else. Footsteps. Not in the corridor. Not outside. Inside the walls. Slow, deliberate, circling my room like a predator circling prey. And beneath the footsteps a voice, small, high, a child's voice, counting 1, 2, 3, 4. I pressed my hands over my ears. The counting continued. 5, 6, 7, 8. I opened my eyes. The walls were breathing. In, out, out. The stones swelling and contracting like lungs, like the entire building was alive and I was inside it, digesting. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, it was morning. The walls were still. But on my desk, which was in my quarters, which I had never brought work home to, sat a piece of parchment. I picked it up. It was an intake order. Name Elara Venn. Age 8. Status collected. Intake date day 1/15. Delivered by citizen Mira Venn. The mother. She turned in her own daughter. I read the signature at the bottom. Neat, careful, shaking just slightly. The Emperor protects. I have done my duty. I sat there for a long time. Then I stood. I washed my face. I dressed. I walked to the administratum. I sat at my desk. I opened my ledger. And I saw that Elara Venn's name was still there. I hadn't saved her. I'd only delayed the inevitable by 3 hours. Just long enough for the mother to realize that protecting her daughter was heresy, and turning her in was faith. I picked up my quill. I crossed out the cancellation. I filed the intake. I stamped it. And I heard, somewhere deep inside my skull, the sound of a door closing. Not loudly, just final. By day 120, the pens held 947. The denunciations continued. Every day, more warrants, more names, more accusations so thin they were almost transparent. Looked at me wrong, spoke in her sleep, made me feel nervous. But every single one was processed, filed, and executed. Because that's what we did. We continued. The arbits stopped bringing warrants in person. They just sent them by servitor courier, bundled in stacks of 50 or more, and I processed them in batches, my hand moving mechanically, stamping and signing and filing until the motions became a rhythm, a ritual, a prayer to the gods of order and compliance. I stopped reading the accusations. It was easier that way, just names, just numbers, just units. At night, I dreamed of corridors that stretched forever, doors that opened onto nothing, and a voice that counted without stopping, without mercy, without end. And every morning, I woke up with the taste of copper in my mouth and the sound of footsteps in the walls. But I got up, I went to work, I continued. Because in the Imperium, that's what you do. You continue until you can't. And then you continue anyway. Because the alternative, stopping, questioning, refusing, is unthinkable. And I was nothing if not obedient. The manufactorum retooled on day 128. I learned about it the way I learned about most things. Through requisition forms and allocation schedules that crossed my desk in endless, silent waves. The orders were brief, stamped with the Mechanicus seal and written in the flat, passionless language of industrial pragmatism. Production line Sigma 120 Zang retasked. New output, restraint systems, confession furniture, sedation apparatus, priority maximal, delay unacceptable, confession furniture. I had to read that twice before I understood what it meant. They were building racks, interrogation chairs, the kind of thing you strapped a body into when you needed answers, or compliance, or just needed the screaming to sound official. And they were building them here, in our hive, for our pens, because the old restraints were failing. I'd seen the reports. Leather straps worn through by constant friction, iron chains corroded by sweat, and God knew what else. Wooden framework rotting in the damp, splintering under weight it was never designed to hold for weeks at a time. The pens were falling apart, so were the people inside them. The manufacturer worked quickly, efficiently. Within 5 days, the first shipment arrived, 30 units, steel, framed, adjustable, with built-in locking mechanisms and drainage ports in the base. Drainage ports. I signed the intake manifest and tried not to think about why furniture needed to drain. The overseers installed them in the lower pens, the ones holding the most volatile psychers, the ones who scream, who thrashed, who had to be moved in teams of 4 with shock, prods and leather hoods. And then they stamped purity seals on every door. Little strips of parchment, inscribed with prayers and blessings, dipped in wax and pressed onto the wood like bandages on a wound. The seals depicted the Aquila, the Emperor's eagle, wings spread in eternal vigilance. They were supposed to protect us. From what, exactly? No one said. But the doors kept rotting anyway. I went down to inspect the new installations on day 133. Standard procedure. Verification of resource allocation, ensuring that what was ordered matched what was delivered. That's what I told myself. But the truth was, I needed to see it. Needed to know that the numbers in my ledger corresponded to something real, something material, something that wasn't just ink on parchment slowly rearranging itself when I wasn't looking. The descent was familiar now. 3 flights of iron stairs, walls pressing closer, air growing colder, the smell thickening until it felt like you were breathing it instead of air. Salt and copper and rot and fear. The custodians were waiting at the bottom. Sergeant Varak and 2 others. Corporal Den, a stocky man with a scar that split his lip, and Private Kellis, a woman who never seemed to blink. Varak nodded when he saw me. Cross, didn't expect you. Requisition verification, I said, holding up my data slate like a shield. He grunted. You want to see the new equipment? That's why I'm here. He led me deeper. The pens had changed. Not structurally. The walls were still stone, the floors still damp, the ceilings still low and oppressive. But the air was different, heavier. Like the weight of too many bodies in too small a space had somehow become physical, pressing down on your shoulders, making every step feel like wading through deep water. We stopped at pen 5. Varak unlocked the door. The purity seal cracked as the wood shifted, splitting down the middle like a broken spine. Seals don't last, Varak muttered. Damp rots the parchment. We've been replacing them daily. Noted, I said, marking it on my slate. He pushed the door open. The smell hit me like a fist. Worse than before. Thicker, sweet and sour at the same time, like meat left too long in the sun, mixed with the acrid bite of old urine and the cloying stench of unwashed bodies pressed together until their individual smells merged into something new and fundamentally wrong. I forced myself to look inside. The confession chairs, racks my mind corrected, were installed along the walls. 30 of them, just as ordered. Steel frames bolted to the stone. Adjustable restraints hanging loose like empty sleeves. Most were occupied. The Psykers strapped into them sat motionless, not relaxed, not sleeping, just still. Their eyes were open, staring at nothing, or at something I couldn't see. Their mouths moved, some whispering, some mouthing silent words, some just opening and closing like fish drowning in air. One of them looked at me, a man, middle-aged. His hair was gone, shaved weeks ago, but it had started growing back in uneven patches. His wrists were raw where the restraints bit into skin. He smiled. Not a cruel smile. Not mocking, just empty. Like his face had remembered how to smile but forgotten why. The Emperor provides, he said. His voice was soft, polite. The Emperor provides, he said again, and again, and again. The others picked it up, one by one. The whisper spread through the room. The Emperor provides, the Emperor provides, the Emperor provides. Overlapping, out of sync, 100 voices speaking the same words at different speeds until the phrase lost all meaning and became just sound, a low, droning hum that made my teeth ache. I stepped back. Varak closed the door. The chanting continued, muffled now, but still audible through the thick wood. They do that, Varak said. Started a few days ago. We don't stop them. Keeps them calm. Do they eat? I ask. When we feed them. Do they sleep? Sometimes. Do they ever stop chanting? Varak looked at me. His face was unreadable. No, he said. We moved to the next pen, and the next, and the next. By the time I reached the surface again, my legs were shaking and my data slate was full of notes I couldn't remember writing. I sat in my office and tried to file the report, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The food chits began thinning on day 137. Not for us, not for the administratum staff, or the arbits or the custodians. We still received our standard rations, protein paste, nutri bars, recaf rations sufficient to keep us upright and functional. But the lower hive, the worker districts, the underhive slums, their allotments were cut by 30%. The justification was simple: resource reallocation. The Psyker tithe required feeding, medical supplies, sedatives, power for the lights, the locks, the purity field generators that hummed day and night in the pen corridors. All of that had to come from somewhere. So it came from the people who couldn't complain. The first riot broke out in Block 19, Tertius, on day 140. I didn't see it. I just read the Arbit's incident report. 3 dead, 17 injured, 42 arrested. The cause was listed as civil unrest due to resource allocation adjustment. They didn't call it starvation, but that's what it was. The arrested were processed, cross-referenced, scanned for psychic markers. 12 of them were flagged, not because they were witches, because they were angry. And anger, the report noted, could be a vector for warp corruption. I processed their intake orders. 12 more names, 12 more bodies in the pens. The preacher came on day 143. He arrived without announcement, without invitation, walking into the administratum offices with the kind of confidence that only comes from absolute faith or absolute madness. His name was Father Auric, a ministorum priest from the Cathedral of the Undying Flame. He was tall, gaunt, with eyes that burned too bright and hands that shook like he was holding back lightning. He didn't ask for permission, he just started preaching. Brothers and sisters, his voice boomed through the office, echoing off the stone walls.
Do not despair. This delay,
this trial, is the Emperor's will. Half the scribes looked up. The other half kept working, heads down, quills scratching. Auric didn't seem to notice.
We are tested,
he shouted. Tested as gold is tested in the fire. The black ships do not come because we have not earned their arrival. We must prove our faith. We must show the God Emperor that we are Marsh. Why? His voice cracked on the last word. Someone coughed. Auric spun toward the sound, his eyes wild. Do you doubt? He hissed. Do you question the divine wisdom? The Emperor sees all, knows all, and if he has chosen to withhold his mercy, it is because we have sinned. He slammed his fist on the nearest desk. The ink bottle jumped. Parchment scattered. Repent, he screamed. Repent and be saved. Confess your doubts. Purge your weakness. Only through suffering can we. The lights went out, all of them, not flickering, not dimming, just gone. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from somewhere deep below, came a sound, low, guttural, not quite a moan, not quite a scream. It rose, and rose, until the walls shook, until the floor vibrated. The lights came back on. Father Auric was on his knees, his hands pressed together, his lips moving in frantic, silent prayer. No one spoke. He stood, smoothed his robes, looked around the room with eyes that no longer burned, just stared. The Emperor provides, he whispered. Then he left. No one followed him. That night I sat in my quarters and tried to eat. The Nutri bar tasted like cardboard and salt. I chewed it mechanically, swallowed without tasting, and chased it down with water that tasted faintly of rust. I opened my ledger. I'd stopped leaving it at the office. I told myself it was for efficiency, checking numbers at home, catching errors before they became problems. But the truth was, I couldn't leave it behind, because the numbers didn't stay still anymore. I flipped to the current page. Total detained 147. I stared at the number. It was correct, I'd counted 3 times, but while I watched, the last digit changed. Not quickly, not dramatically, it just shifted. The ink rippled, reformed. Total detained 148. I blinked. Total detained. My chest tightened. I slammed the ledger shut. My hands were shaking. I opened it again. The number was still. Total detained 149. But in the margin, written in handwriting that looked almost like mine but wasn't, were 3 words. Still not enough. I closed the ledger. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the walls breathe and the numbers count themselves, over and over, in a voice that might have been mine or might have been something else wearing my voice like a coat. And I understood, with the cold clarity of the damned, that the pens would never be full. Because the tithe had no ceiling, only a floor, and we were standing on it, and it was cracking. The transmission came on day 154. Not through the Vox network, not through the astropathic choir. It came through the void picket, the orbital defense station that circled our world like a rusted crown, manned by Navy personnel we never saw and barely remembered existed. The message was short, 17 words, not counting the timestamp and authentication code. Quarantine declared, subsector Moros, Imperial authority absolute, relief assets in transit, maintain compliance, Emperor protects. That was it. No explanation, no timeline, no clarification of what relief assets meant or when they might arrive. Just quarantine. The word spread through the administratum like a virus. Within an hour, every scribe, every clerk, every janitor and servitor knew. Within 3 hours, it had reached the lower hive. By nightfall, the entire city was whispering it, passing it from mouth to mouth like a forbidden prayer. Quarantine. It meant we were cut off. No ships in, no ships out, no trade, no supply runs, no reinforcements, and no black ships, ever. The planetary governor issued an edict the next morning. It was read aloud in every district, every block, every factory floor and HAB unit common room. Servo skulls floated through the streets, broadcasting the message on endless loop, their mechanical voices flat and free of inflection, citizens of Hive Primus. By order of Governor Hector's Vane, the following restrictions are now in effect: 1 curfew from 2000 hours to U600 hours. Violators will be detained. 2 all public assemblies of more than 5 persons are prohibited. 3 food and water rations will be adjusted to ensure strategic reserves. 4 the following words are hereby classified as seditious and forbidden under penalty of law. The list was long: abandonment, forgotten, betrayal, starving, lost, and, of course, black ships. Saying those words aloud was now treason. Which meant the thing we were all thinking about, every waking moment, was the one thing we were forbidden to name. The bells rang every hour now. Great iron bells mounted in the cathedral towers, their sound low and mournful, like the city itself was tolling its own funeral. And in the pens beneath the administratum, the count continued to climb. 149.3, 1267. The denunciations hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd increased. Fear made people desperate. Desperation made them cruel. And cruelty, dressed in the language of faith, became virtue. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Parents turned on children. The arbits couldn't process the warrants fast enough, so they started deputizing citizens. Anyone willing to carry a badge and a club and enforce the emperor's justice in the streets. It was madness dressed as order, and I kept counting. The riot came on day 161. I was in my office when the first explosion rattled the windows. Not close, maybe a kilometer away down in the median districts, but loud enough that every head in the room snapped up, every hand froze mid-stroke. Silence. Then the Vox casters crackled to life. All Arbit's units respond to Block 22 median. Riot in progress. Armed resistance confirmed. Lethal force authorized. The words were calm, professional, but beneath them I could hear it, distant, muffled by stone and distance, but unmistakable. Screaming. The riot lasted 4 hours. By the time it was over, 63 people were dead, 112 wounded, 207 arrested. The Arbit's report listed the cause as civilian unrest due to resource scarcity and heretical rumor propagation. Translation: people were starving, and someone had said the black ships weren't coming back. The arrested were processed, flagged, detained. By the end of the week, the pens held 1391. I stopped going down to see them. It wasn't that I didn't care, it was that I cared too much, and caring was becoming a weight I couldn't carry anymore, so I stayed at my desk. I counted, I filed, I stamped, and every night, I went home to a room that smelled like damp stone and heard voices counting in the walls. On day 168, I was assigned an escort, not for protection, for supervision. Her name was Watcher, Militant Ceres, a member of the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle. She was tall, armored in black ceramite, with a face like carved marble and eyes that never blinked. She didn't speak, she just followed. Everywhere I went, my desk, the records vault, the hygiene station, my quarters, she was 3 steps behind, silent and implacable, like a shadow that had learned to walk. I asked her why. She stared at me for 5 full seconds. Then, "You have been marked." Marked. My voice came out higher than I intended. Marked for what? Observation. Why? Her expression didn't change. "You ask many questions, Clerk Cross. That's not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It is not." She didn't elaborate. From that point on, every report I filed, every form I stamped, every entry I made in the ledger, she saw it all, watching, recording, judging. I tried to work normally, but I could feel her eyes, cold, unblinking, waiting. The chain gang departure happened on day 172. I didn't know about it in advance. No one did. It was decided in a closed session of the Planetary Council, stamped with the governor's seal, and executed within 6 hours. The order was simple: relocate 200 Psykers to the upper vaults. The upper vaults were old, pre-Imperial, some said, carved into the bedrock beneath the governor's palace, their walls lined with strange symbols that the Mechanicus had tried and failed to decode. They were cold, airless, and, according to the building schematics, they went down for at least half a kilometer before the maps simply ended. No one knew what was at the bottom. No one had ever come back to say. I processed the transfer manifest. 200 names, randomized selection, no pattern, no logic, just bodies. I watched them go. The custodians chained them together, wrist to wrist, ankle to ankle, a long shuffling line of shaved heads and hollow eyes. Some walked on their own. Some had to be dragged. One, an old woman with skin like parchment, collapsed halfway down the corridor, and the custodians just stepped over her and kept pulling, the chain dragging her limp body along the stone until her robes tore and left streaks of red. They didn't stop. Watcher Militant Ceres stood beside me watching. Why the upper vaults? I asked. Containment, she said. Containment of what? She didn't answer. The chain gang descended. I heard their footsteps long after they disappeared from sight. Slow, rhythmic, echoing up from the deep like a heartbeat. Then nothing. That night the frost came. Not outside, inside. I woke to find ice crystals forming on the walls of my quarters, thin and delicate, spreading in fractal patterns that looked almost like writing. I touched one. It burned. Cold so intense it felt like fire searing into my fingertip, and I jerked back with a hiss. The crystal didn't melt. I stared at it, and slowly, I realized it was writing. Not low Gothic, not high Gothic, not any language I knew. But I could read it anyway. Feed us. I stumbled back. My breath misted in the freezing air. The walls were covered in it now. Frost spreading like mold. The words repeating, layering, overlapping until the stone was white and the air was so cold I couldn't breathe without coughing. Feed us, feed us, feed us. I ran. I don't know where I thought I was going. Away, anywhere. But the corridor outside was the same. Frost on the walls, frost on the floor, words written in ice, thousands of them, crawling over every surface, every door, every window. Feed us. Still hungry. Not enough. I pressed my back against the wall and slid down to the floor, my hands over my ears, my eyes squeezed shut, and I heard it. Not in the walls this time. In my head. A voice. Low. Patient. Endless. You know what we need. I opened my eyes. The frost was gone. The walls were bare. I was sitting in my corridor alone, my breath no longer misting, the air warm and stale and utterly, completely normal. But my hands were shaking, and when I looked down I saw that my fingertip, the one I'd touched the frost with, was black. Not bruised. Black, like frostbite, like rot. I went to the medica station the next morning. The orderly looked at my finger, frowned, and swabbed it with disinfectant. Looks like a burn, he said. It was cold, I said. He gave me a look. Cold doesn't do this. I know what I felt. He shrugged. I'll file it as environmental exposure. Keep it clean. If it spreads, come back. It didn't spread, but it didn't heal either. The blackness stayed, a perfect circle on the pad of my index finger, like a brand, like a mark. Watcher Militant Ceres saw it. She said nothing, but her hand moved to the bolt pistol at her hip, and she watched me even more closely after that. On day 179 the vox casters went silent. Not broken, not damaged, just off. Every screen in the administratum flickered once, twice, and went dark. The serval skulls stopped mid-flight, hovering in place like flies trapped in amber, their red ocular lenses dimming to black. The silence was total. No hum of machinery, no chatter of scribes, no distant clang of the manufactorum or the tolling of the bells. Just nothing. It lasted 10 minutes. Then the vox casters came back online, but the voice that came through wasn't the governor. It wasn't human. It was flat, distorted, like someone speaking through water or static or the space between thoughts. Compliance maintained. Teeth collected. Faith endures. A pause. The void is pleased. The transmission ended. The office was silent. Someone, I don't know who, whispered, "What the fuck was that?" No one answered, because we all knew, deep down, in the part of us that still remembered how to be afraid we knew. The void wasn't empty. It was listening, and it was hungry. and we were feeding it.